Welcome everybody to the first installment, the first in the series of this Astrology Apprenticeship program. We're going to be focusing on the Indian astrological text, Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. It is this book that holds many of the key techniques and principles that one needs in order to understand how to read a horoscope, a birth chart, accurately. So if we can put together the principles of Parashara in an intelligent fashion, we can learn to be a scientific and methodical astrologer, one that can look at a chart and, by putting the pieces together, determine what all the varied and diverse variables are actually saying about the very complex individual that's probably waiting to hear your advice astrologically. So Parashara takes on a holistic approach when it comes to astrology, which is one of the reasons I enjoy this approach. And what this means, though, is that you may learn one principle, and then you may learn another principle. And those two principles can seem like they're not actually related. And they may not be in the way that you would want them to lock together immediately to give you a technique or a bit of information so that you can go immediately and read a chart. And the way I like to look at this, it's very similar to learning to build a house or build a car or build anything for that matter. When you're building something, you need tools. And you may have a hammer, you may have a wrench, you may have a saw, you may have a drill, you may have various electric devices. And each of those things are going to play a role in putting together and building that house or that vehicle. Although you're going to use each of those tools at a different step in the process of building that thing. So whenever we're learning astrology, especially through this methodical way, you need to really think holistically and realize that something you may learn right now, you may have to learn 3 or 4 other things before that one piece of information you've been given can actually be utilized in a meaningful way when it comes to chart interpretation. So keep this in mind as we go through this course. And this is going to be a very long course. I don't know if you've ever looked at or read any of the texts available on Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, but it's a 2-volume text. And it takes a lot of contemplative study and a lot of patience to get through it. So if you're looking for entertainment, this is probably not going to be the video series for you. If you're seriously interested in learning astrology for yourself, for your spiritual growth, or to assist others, then buckle down for a lengthy process, one that will be enjoyable because it is quite a lot of fun to see how astrological influences can give you an understanding of life, of the people around you, of situations, and so on. But again, back to the original point. Each technique, each principle that we cover, you need to get it in your mind, in your consciousness, in the same way that you have to understand what does each planet represent, what does each house represent, what does each Varga or divisional chart represent, when do we use the Baladi Avashtas, when do we use the Deeptati Avashtas, when do we use the Jagrati Avashtas, when do we use the Lajatati Avashtas, when do we use a Rashi Dasha? When do we use a Nakshatra Dasha? When do we use a planetary aspect, a Graha aspect? When do we use a Rashi aspect? All of these things have their place, and they all lock together. But you have to learn first what each one means individually. So we can't take principles or techniques out of context when it comes to judging a chart, which is one of the reasons why you may notice that I very rarely respond to questions on my channel that says, my Jupiter's here, what does that mean? Or I have this planet in this sign in the Shashtiyamsha, what does that mean? Well, that's just that's taking it out of context. You had to have probably looked at the whole rest of the chart before we could zero into that one thing. So we're learning to put pieces of a puzzle together. And I will speak about the relevance of each technique as we get to it and what it's used for. We'll talk about how to look at different areas of life and how to judge and assess those areas of life through time, again, going through each technique. And how to combine the techniques, how to combine the philosophy appropriately so that you can get this holistic view that I'm discussing. Now, this course is meant to be a foundation for an extensive apprenticeship program that I have in mind. And we need to cover these topics first in this regard. You need to have access to it so that you can start studying it, thinking about it. That way, should you decide that you want to participate in this longer apprenticeship program I have in mind, you will have a good foundation, which means that when we start talking, when we start learning together, you will be on the same page. You will understand that when I talk about a particular principle, what I'm saying. That's going to make it so much easier. This is very similar to the practice of yoga for the purpose of enlightenment. Too often people want to get involved in yoga for healing and things of this nature, when really the system of yoga, not hatha yoga, not the postures, although that's part of the system, isn't for healing you, it's for realizing yourself. And think of it this way. If you're going to go run a marathon, are you going to show up to training to run a marathon with 2 broken legs? No. You're first going to heal your broken legs, then we can talk about training to run a marathon. All right. So essentially, my goal with this whole process is to get us all on the same page so that you know the foundations of the principles within astrology, specifically coming from this Eastern Indian tradition. And we can move forward with greater clarity and ease. So you'll become a better astrologer. You'll have less confusion about it, because that's one of the big things that most people bring when they want to get a tutorial with me or something of that nature, is they have read about all these varied and different techniques, but no one has ever put them in place for them, nor have they ever thought about how they might fit together in a logical manner. So this is our goal. Now, all of the lessons here on this in this course, they're going to be posted freely. I'm going to put them up on YouTube so anyone has access to them, because personally I believe that you should have access to them. The book Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra is available, so you can find that anywhere. But these are going to be made available freely. I am going to be recording the audio of these courses, and say after I get an hour's worth collected, I'm going to post them at AshevilleVedicAstrology.com for maybe like $5 for an hour's worth to download, so that you can download it. So they're going to be free, but if you do feel like supporting this work financially, then just go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com and download any of the classes that you want once they're already posted. And again, I'm going to try to keep it very reasonable so that it's affordable for you, and I'm able to do the work, and you're able to benefit from it. And I decided to do this for a few reasons. Number one, many people through time so far on this astrology channel have asked me about supporting this work, giving donations and whatnot. I'm not a nonprofit. I'm just a little limited liability set up as a business, because my work is astrology. I do this full time. So I can't accept donations in the sense of you get a tax write-off for it. But at least in this way, I'm able to give you something back should you want to support the work financially. And also, there are numerous courses available, 10-hour courses, 16-hour courses, audio and video courses already available at AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, in case you can't wait for me to make the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra course. Although, in my mind, this is where it's all going to start. It actually should have started here, but it didn't occur to me to do this until just now. So for now, this seems like the most intelligent solution I have to that issue. Now, what else do I need to share with you? Well, you need to know who I am, because before you learn anything from anybody, you need to figure out, does this person represent, are they an individual that I would like to learn from? Because all too often people just say, oh, this guy wrote a book, he must know something, so I'm going to go learn from him. Or, he's got a big YouTube following, so he must know something, I must go learn from him. And that's not always the case. Anyone can write a book nowadays. Anyone can put up a YouTube channel. So who am I? All right. Well, first of all, I have no credentials. I did graduate a 4-year degree in college, and I am participating in a master's program right now specifically related to astronomy and astrology. But I have no astrological credentials. I don't come from a family of astrologers. I'm from a small town in West Virginia that was known for coal mining, and it was a river district. I don't have any astrological certifications. I never did that. I'm not a pundit. I have an accent that doesn't always allow me to pronounce terminology correctly. I've never been given any prestigious awards, nor have I been recognized by any astrological society. I've learned through books, correspondence courses. I've learned from people, friends with more experience in astrology, years of more experience in astrology. And luckily I've had great friends in that regard. I've learned by doing astrology, studying on my own, making mistakes, wondering why certain things didn't work. And that's helped me out quite a bit, because I'm not one that likes to keep making the same mistakes and then just brushing over it. Meaning, if you think about it this way, a lot of astrologers, if they make a mistake, they don't really ever go back and think about, why did I make that mistake? They just say, oh, well, I don't know, and then they move on. You know, I've been this way with music, I've been this way with writing. If I'm playing a song and I mess up a solo, or I mess up a chord, or I go out of key, I don't say, oh, well, that's just a fluke. I ask myself, well, how can I fix that? And I keep practicing until I get it. So I've learned astrology mainly through making a lot of mistakes. And overall, I'm self-taught. Okay, so I've read a lot of books. I contemplate the subject quite a bit. I've been practicing for a while. And that's what I've got. So if you are comfortable learning from someone like that, then we're going to get along just fine. If you're not, well, we'll get to that. I began studying astrology not long after I got out of college. I began work as an astrologer professionally about 5 years after I started studying. So I wasn't one of those individuals that took a week-long course or a weekend course and all of a sudden decided I was an astrologer. I thought about it for a while. So it took me about 5 years before I started doing it even remotely professionally. And as of this moment, I've been a professional astrologer, which means I work full-time as an astrologer. I'm sitting at my computer, either working on classes, writing, or doing sessions, mostly doing sessions, for about 10 years now. So again, if it's acceptable for you to learn from someone like that, you're welcome to. If it's not, there are plenty of professional astrology organizations out there. There are plenty of better respected, more famous, more intelligent people than me to learn from. All right. So, as they say, with the advent of all these global connections through the internet, through books, the world is your oyster. You can find a teacher for you. But if for some odd reason you think I have some sense, and you would like to continue exploring this work with me, well, we've got plenty of time, and I'm happy to do it. All right. Now, one more section I want to go over before we start doing videos specifically on the topic at hand, Parashara's work, is you becoming an apprentice astrologer, working towards that. What are the skills and qualifications, or qualities, I should say, that you need to start developing now so that you can actually become a good astrologer? So that at the end of the day, when we go through the apprenticeship program and you do your sessions, and I listen to the sessions that you have done, and you're accurate, and the clients are pleased with what you have shared, in the sense that it was accurate, not that you tried to please them, and that you were logical and approached it with clarity and good conscience. And I say, great, you are now an astrologer. I will send clients to you, I will put your name on my website, whatever it might be. These are the things you have to start developing. Number one, meditation is probably top on my list. If you know anything about my other work, I teach yogic meditation, particularly Kriya Yoga, with an emphasis on vichara and self-inquiry. And that's really what I like to do most, but I live in a world, I live in a culture where I have a mortgage and where I have insurance payments, and I have to buy groceries. So it's not good for me to sit on my couch all day in contemplative meditation. At least not yet. But why do I think meditation is so wonderful for you? Because it will allow you to contemplate the principles of astrology. Contemplation is key to so much. Too often people learn astrology by looking at a book and saying, oh, this lord of a house is in this sign with that planet, it means this. In the same way that you get a lot of yogas. People memorize all these yogas, but they never really think about, why does that yoga make sense? And if you have the capacity to calm your mind and to focus, then you can contemplate astrological texts such as Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, or Jaimini Sutras, or Yavana Jataka, or Brihat Jataka, or whatever it might be. You can contemplate them, Sarvarta Chintamani, and then you learn why that means that. It opens up in your awareness. So now, if we use the musical idea again, you're not just playing a scale because someone told you to play them in this order. You're playing a scale because you understand why that makes sense melodically. And then you don't need that rote memorization. It's almost like now you can be an artist with it. Now you can work with it. Now it becomes alive for you. So meditation is going to be one of the first things you have to develop. If you already have a meditation practice, excellent. If you are practicing contemplation or contemplative practices, excellent. If you're not, well, then you need to start that within your meditation. My other channel, youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online. Go to the playlists. There's some free video courses on there that speak specifically how to develop a contemplative practice. At least I think there are. I do remember talking about it. Also, within my new book that's going to be coming out probably just about 10 days, Kriya Yoga Vichara, there's a whole chapter there on contemplation, how to practice contemplation. This is a skill set that you have to have, and it is all based on the capacity to meditate. All right, so I'm not saying you need to meditate for spiritual reasons. If you want to, that's perfectly fine. You need to meditate so that your nervous system is functional, is balanced, so that your brain is clear, so that your mind is clear, so that you can focus on something and really learn, so that you can give your full attention to what you're doing and not have to worry about distractions coming in the way and causing you to be confused, which happens to a lot of people. So meditation is number one. Number two, we already talked about the capacity to learn contemplation, contemplative practices, which means that when you have a question, why does the sun represent this? You don't just have to go scouring through all your books, although that's a good start because you do need to get that information in your mind, but you sit down and you meditate on it. Why does this make sense? Until you have that aha moment that gives you a direct realization as to why the sun would represent that. All right, so contemplative practices is number two, and there are 9 of these. Number 3, the capacity to read slowly and thoroughly, which means you're not just going to get a book and read it through to say, oh, I've read 12 astrology books now. You're going to get one book, and you're going to focus and read through, and if you understand what you're reading, great. You keep going. But when you get to something you don't understand, you stop, and you try to figure it out by yourself. And as we go through Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you're looking for entertainment, you're not going to get it here. We're going to go through it slowly and methodically because I want, as best we can through this kind of medium, I want you to learn well. And it's going to take time, it's going to take patience, and it's going to take practice. So learning to read slowly and thoroughly so you understand what you're reading. So essentially that's reading comprehension skills. Now you're going to have to learn to think abstractly as well as concretely. And that will come in time. So that's not something that you might not necessarily be able to develop right now, because personally I don't know of any methods or ways to do that other than astrology. Because with astrology you have to think concretely, which means you have to think about this planet's here and that sign. We do this kind of math with our Shadbala, with our Vimshopak strength. That's the concrete aspect of it. But then you have to learn to think abstractly, because you're dealing with a human being who's lived their life up until this point, which means from the time they're born, which is where their birth chart is, until now, they've had an opportunity to make different choices, to let certain karmas exhaust themselves, to put into play new karmas and such. So you're going to have to learn to use your abstract capacity, your abstract thinking capacity as well. And that's, maybe comparable to using the left and right brain. The logical aspect, as well as the nonlinear aspect, the artistic aspect, as well as the scientific aspect. You have to have both. Personally, that's my understanding. Because if you're just all artistic, well, you might as well just be a psychic. Nothing wrong with that. Just don't say you're doing astrology. You're doing something psychic. When it comes to doing astrology with complete logic all the time, well, your limited human brain can't process everything that needs to be processed astrologically. So it can process enough to prepare the information to be synthesized, but it needs to be run through the artistic part of your brain, the nonlinear part of your brain, to get what I consider to be probably the most accurate information for the person that you're working with. So thinking abstractly as well as concretely is number 4. Number 5, patience. 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 Why patience? It takes a long time to learn astrology. And you end up not learning astrology very well if you just learn a few things and act like you know something. You might get lucky every now and then, and it's great fun at parties. But in order to really understand the mechanics and the principles, both the physical principles of astrology as well as the metaphysical principles of astrology, takes years. Years. As I mentioned, it took me about 5 years before I even started including astrology within my profession. And that was mainly because people wanted me to do their charts, and I thought I was terrible at it, and I probably was. But they were deriving benefit, and they kept wanting to give me money to do it, and I thought, all right, well, we're going to have to work this out. So, astrology for me developed over time in regards to a study I had, which in a sense came into my professional sphere, not by me going out and saying, I'm going to be an astrologer. I did go to school for psychology and philosophy, but I actually doubted astrology, and I did for most of the time I was studying it because there was so much conflict within the principles that I saw. But I did start to see threads of what made sense, and I was able to put those together. So anyway, 5 years. Give yourself 5 years of sincerely learning, trying to learn astrology. And then we'll talk about the possibility of probably being able to say something intelligent about astrology. And maybe you're a savant. Some people are like that. For example, when it came to playing guitar, I'm a decent guitar player, but I'd been playing for a few years, and I introduced one of my best friends when I was younger to guitar, and within 6 months he was blowing me away. And so some people do learn quicker. So I'm not saying that you can't learn it quicker. It's just that more than likely patience is going to be one of the prime virtues for you. If you don't understand something, don't worry about it. You will. There have been many times in astrology where I've talked to, one of my mentors or astrological friends, and they told me something, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I still thought it didn't make any sense. Then one day, 6 months later, a year later, aha! Because of my capacity to contemplate, I kept thinking about it, kept contemplating, and then it made sense. Okay? So if I didn't have the patience, I would just say, oh, that doesn't make any sense, that's stupid, and then I would move on. And I would keep doing that, and I would never learn anything. So if as you go, something doesn't make sense, it doesn't mean you throw it out. It means that it might make more sense as long as you learn a few other things and you're practicing patience with the whole process. Number 6, you need to allow yourself to make mistakes. So as you go, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to start talking to people about their charts so that you can learn. You're going to say this, they're going to say, no, that's not true. You don't say, oh, I'm a terrible person, I didn't get that right. You think to yourself, well, is it not true? Or did I misinterpret it? Or could it be interpreted another way? Because as you do that, then you're going to start to see how to interpret, how to use different techniques more accurately. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's how you learn. There's an idea that the reason that, Michael Jordan, famous basketball player from a while ago, the reason he made so many points was because he took more shots than everybody else, right? So we can say he is a great basketball player who scored all of these points, but he also took more shots than other people, right? So if you keep trying, eventually you'll get more. You will get more things right if you try more often. Essentially, that's the point. All right. Number 7, detachment. The capacity for detachment. Why do you need to practice detachment? Well, because astrology is dealing with the lives of individual people. And the more you practice astrology, and the more you hear the stories of people, and the more you see people's charts, you realize life is rough. And sometimes things aren't so good, and some things are just outright painful, bitter, and probably want to make you cry. And so if you're looking at someone's chart and you see that combination, but you don't want to tell them that, or you don't want to work with it, or you don't want to admit that that's a possibility, you're going to miss something. You're not going to be doing astrology well, because when that comes up, you're not going to have the capacity to think it through, because your emotions are going to get involved, right? So you have to be very detached. For example, when I was learning the Yuan method, an energetic technique, an energetic healing technique, Chinese healing technique, I don't know if it's an ancient one, but it's a modern one. Dr. Yuan developed it, Kim Yuan. One of the things that he said that stuck with me, he said, when you're working with someone, he said, you have to not care one way or the other whether they live or die. Because if you care in the sense of getting your emotions involved, you're not going to make a good choice. You're going to freak out. You're not going to be able to look at all of the possibilities and deal with what is most important, right? So it's the whole idea of just being calm, being cool, being collected. So you have to develop detachment, which goes back to our work on meditation. And personally, I do think that astrologers should practice some form of jnana yoga or internal development, because that will naturally create detachment for you. And astrology is going to create that anyway, because the more you see the world, and the more you understand the universe and the principles of the world through astrology, you are going to become less interested in personality things. So be aware of that. You're going to see something from a bigger picture, and it'll be a little less dramatic for you. Now, number 8, an openness for debate and others' points of view. At this current juncture, this current time, this era, very few astrologers agree on anything. There are 10 different ayanamshas, ways that you measure the precession of the zodiac. There are all kinds of different schools of how do you look at a chart this way, how do you look at that way, and they all say they're right. But I would like to promote an openness for debate. Because if we have that openness, then we can actually learn all together. You have your idea, you have your point, I have mine. Then we say, all right, well, let's write this out in a logical fashion, and then let's test it. And let's, with detachment, see which one worked. Or maybe none of them work. But we need to be able to do that. So when it comes to astrology, whether someone's practicing Western astrology, tropical Vedic astrology, sidereal Western astrology, sidereal Vedic Indian astrology, Mayan astrology, Hellenistic, whatever it might be open, because maybe they have a principle or a way of seeing the chart that you just don't understand because you've never studied it or applied it. All right. So we need to have this openness and respect for ourselves and for our own learning, as well as for other people's learning. All right, that's a very important thing. Openness and respect for yourself and for others, and an openness to have healthy debate, to be able to have healthy debate. And healthy debate isn't saying, my religious belief says this, so therefore it's correct. It's saying, okay, you believe this, I believe this, let's test it out and see what works, right? So my approach throughout this whole thing is going to be, as best as I can, be a very practical approach, which is why I'm entitling this essentially the essentials of Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. So we're going to be looking very practically, and we're probably not going to get too much into the religious aspect of the whole thing, although that is important too for the cultural study and cultural implications of astrology. Now, the final thing we need to talk about is consistency in your studies. Stay with it. Study a little bit every day, year after year, month after month. And if it's not that interesting to you, well, then this might not necessarily be the best course of action for you to consider an apprenticeship or this kind of program. But if you just have a burning desire for it and you just can't let it be, it's been years and years, and I'm still fascinated by astrology. And the more I learn, the less I know, because there's so much more. You become aware of the magnitude, the immensity of what is actually going on astrologically. And then you realize, even though you've been studying for years, you've just barely even scratched the surface. And so commitment into your studies, consistency in your studies, These are all things which will make the practice of astrology, both for yourself spiritually, philosophically, the practice of astrology to assist others to understand themselves, and their directions in life. That's where you're going to find real value, as long as you're consistent in it and you continue in this way, and you aim to develop all of these qualities or skills. And there may be a few others I've forgotten, but these are the main ones that I think are most important. Now, what do you need for this course? I suppose something to listen to the recordings with or to watch these videos. That's the first thing. You'll probably need an astrology program so that you can eventually create charts. I recommend Kala software, K-A-L-A. If you're interested in that, you can find it at AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. Just look at the little tab that says Kala software. I'll also put a link in below this video so that you can explore it there. Kala is a great program, no matter what kind of astrology you seem to want to do. It'll use the tropical zodiac if you want. It'll use the sidereal zodiac if you want. It'll use different cusp systems. You can use different ayanamshas. I mean, it's pretty thorough in regards to the options that it gives you. So however you decide, whatever ayanamsha you decide to use, whatever zodiac you decide to use, based on your experience, based on your logic, based on your reason, that option will be in Kala. And I will say I don't really know any other software programs that well, because when I first started studying astrology, like I said, I was just out of college, I didn't have a whole lot of money, and Kala was the most affordable one of them all. But luckily, the most affordable one ended up being really spectacular. So if you are familiar with other astrology programs, that's perfectly fine. But the one I will be using, and I recommend, is Kala. And then a notebook to keep track of your insights and to take notes. You have to take notes. As you go through each video, don't just stare at the screen and listen and zone out. Get your piece of paper out with your pen or whatever it might be, and what seems important to you, what you hear that you think you need to consider more, write it down. The act of writing down is going to help get it in your consciousness. And then you can go back at night before you go to sleep, and this is one of the ways to be consistent in your studies and dedicated. You can look through your notes and review what you heard today or what you learned and think about it as you fall asleep. Sometimes you'll get the best results if you read a little bit and just really try to understand, what does this mean as you fall asleep? You either have a dream or maybe the next day you'll have an aha moment and it'll make perfect sense to you. So for now, that's pretty much all you need. Now, if you've made it this far into the video, we're doing pretty well. I'm going to begin with the first chapter of Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra in our next section. So get your notebook and we'll get started. Okay, be well. Peace.